Hey, in this video you'll learn everything you need to know to play Aatrox in your next games. Now let's get into it. Let's start out by talking about Aatrox's abilities. The first one is his passive, which is extremely important. It is 24 to 12 second cooldown, and whenever the passive is active he gets 50 bonus range. His next auto attack will do 5 to 12% max health first skill damage, which is enormous. It also heals him for 100% of that bonus first skill damage. And not only that, the cooldown is reduced by 2 seconds whenever he hits an enemy or a big monster. Additionally, it gets reduced by another 2 seconds if his Q, Darking Blade, hits in the sweet spot on an enemy. Alright, now we're getting into Aatrox's Darking Blade. It's a little bit complicated, so bear with me. The cooldown is 14 to 6 seconds, which means he's kinda weak early because he really needs this ability. But once he gets to level 9 and it's only 6 seconds, he gets extremely strong. Now whenever you cast it, there's 3 casts. Between those casts is a 1 second static cooldown, which basically means you cast it, you have to wait a second till you can cast it again. Now, after you cast the first one, there's also a 4 second timing window where you can cast the second one. So if you exceed that timing window, then you can't cast it anymore and it goes on cooldown. Which means this is a time where you can get abused if you don't cast it, so it's very important you always cast it again. Now each of Aatrox's Qs looks different. The first cast is a long one, then the second one is kind of wider, and the third one is a big circle right in the middle. Now there's a sweet spot on the cast, and if you hit people in the sweet spot, you do more damage, and you knock people off for 0.25 seconds, which is a huge advantage because they can't move, and then you can combo with other abilities, for example your W, which we'll talk about later, and make that hit easier. Now another thing to note is, the first Q does a decent amount of damage, the second Q does 25% more damage, and the third Q does 50% more damage compared to the first one. So it scales up depending on which Q you're using. It's really important that you hit the second and the third Q. Alright, now we're getting to Aatrox's W, Infernal Change. This ability to have an extremely long cooldown is crucial. You hit it, so try and combine it with your Q. Now if you do miss it, be careful because you're very weak without it. Now let's talk about what the ability actually does. So when you hit an opponent with a chain, they get slowed by 25% for 1.5 seconds. If the enemy is still chained and haven't gone out of the area after 1.5 seconds, they get dragged back to the center and they take the damage once more. Now Infernal Change should be comboed with your Q, so try and use it after your first or your second Q so you can hit your Qs better in the sweet spot. It also makes it a lot easier to hit your W while the enemy is knocked up. Time for Umbral Dash, Aatrox's E ability. This ability has an amazing passive which heals you for 20 to 30% of the damage you deal, and also get an active component which allows you to dash in any direction you want. Now this ability is crucial. You combine it with your Q so you can hit your Qs better if people are getting out of it or jumping away. Now one important thing to note, this ability is extremely important for Aatrox to stay alive if you use it aggressively. And you miss your Q while using your E to try and hit it, the opponent can all-in you and try and kill you, so be really careful about that. And also be careful about dashing forward then against dash opponents, because if they dash in on you at the same time, well, your Q is most likely gonna miss, and you're gonna be in a tough spot, unless it's the third Q, of course. Now we're getting to Aatrox's coolest ability, his ultimate. Aatrox goes Super Saiyan for 10 seconds. He gains 60 to 100% movement speed, which is the case over time. He also gains 20 to 40% attack damage. And he gains 50 to 100% increased healing, which is wonderful with his E passive, which already gave 20 to 30%. Then he also becomes a little bit bigger. Now one really important thing to note about his ultimate is, if you use it in minion waves or near minion waves, you first of all fear and slow all the minions next to you. Second, you become something called ghosted, which means you can run through the minions, but opponents might actually be getting minion blocked by them, which means this ability is extremely good to use if there's the opportunity to minion block the opponents, and you can run straight through and catch them by doing that. Now the last thing I want to say about his ultimate is, each takedown extends the duration by 5 seconds, which is pretty cool because it rewards good play. Alright, now it's time to talk about Aatrox's skill order, which is pretty straightforward. You start out by skilling Q level 1, you skill E level 2, and then you skill W level 3. After that, you max Q, then you max E because the passive healing is amazing, and the third ability to max is obviously the W. Now let's do the question of the day. Which champion did you play the most last season? And which champion are you going to play the most this season? Are you going to look for a new champion, or is it going to be the same one? Alright, it's time for the runes. Let's go through them. So Aatrox rune page is pretty straightforward. First you go Conqueror, then you go Triumph. After that, you mostly go Tenacity unless you really don't need it. And if you really don't need Tenacity because the enemy team doesn't have much CC at all, then you can go Alacrity for a little bit of attack speed. The last one you take is going to be Last Stand because it's just the best one. Then the second runes is a bit more interesting. Most of the time you want to go for Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter because having healing and adding more healing on top of that just makes healing overpowered. The more you have, the better it is. Now if you need to be extremely passive and defensive because you think you're going to get attacked all the time in lane, you can opt in for Bone Plating and Revitalize over in Resolve instead. Then in the small runes it's pretty straightforward as well. Aatrox's ability Focus, so you take attack damage on the first one, attack damage on the second one, and the third one mostly armor because you're often going to take minion damage, unless you really need magic resist, which can happen in very few cases, for example against a Vladimir. And now we're getting into the item build for Aatrox. Let's start with the starting item. The most common starting items is Dawn's Shield with Potion, but if you have an easy laning phase, you can go Dawn's Blade with a Potion instead and be much more aggressive. And now the next item you want to look at is either Fates or Iron Spike Whip. So Iron Spike Whip is when you want to snowball and push a lot and you want to kill people. Fates is more if you want to play a bit more safe, you want to have more healing, and you also want to have more health, which means it's harder to kill you. Both these options are extremely good depending on the situation you're in. So think about, can the opponent kill you? Am I going to get ganked? If you're not going to get ganked and if the opponent is weaker than you, go for Iron Spike. If you do think there's a chance you'll get ganked and killed, well, Fates is a pretty good option. Then after you have chosen the first item, you obviously build a Gordringer because Gordringer is the best currently. Then you go for your boots, which can be Mercury Treads or plated steel caps. Mostly you go plated, but it depends who you're against. Now you have your mythic item and boots and need to choose what you do next. Now the options are Steric's Gauge, Ravenous Hydra, or Black Cleaver. Most of the time you want to go Steric's Gauge because it's extremely good in team fights and so on. However, if the enemy can't really kill you, Ravenous Hydra is going to be better, or if you want to split push more, Ravenous Hydra is also better. Then last, the option you can also take is Black Cleaver, which is great if the enemy team have 5 tanks or 4 tanks or 3 tanks that are extremely tanky. You need Black Cleaver, your AD carry doesn't do any damage, and you want to help him out a bit. It does work, but it's very situational. Now once you have the second item, the same items appears again, you can choose one of those. However, another item also pops up. If you went for the Ravenous Hydra route and you want more healing and more split push and you don't want to team fight very much, you can also add in a Death Stance and become a full-on split pusher. Now this is a very risky route to take, and if you do take that one, be very careful about team fighting because you're going to be super squishy and blow up really fast. However, if they can't kill you, you're going to heal like a monster. Now when you get to the fourth item, you already have a really strong core build. What you want to look at is the same things, or potentially now a Spirit Vestige if you're against a lot of AP champions, a Chimpanzee Chainsaw if you're against a lot of healing and you need to stop that, or a Guardian Angel if you're against, for example, Syndra and you're going to get one-shotted, so you just want to have that second life. All of those options are also good, including the previous options which we already talked about. And fifth item is going to be the exact same as the other ones, besides the fact that you can also add in a Gargoyles or Randuins if you're against certain champions. For example, if you just need to soak up as much damage as possible in a quick fashion, Gargoyles does work, it's pretty decent. And then you also have Randuin's Omen, which is pretty decent if you're against a lot of ADs with a crit chance and you just want to take a little bit less damage. Now if you had any confusion about Aatrox, I hope this guide helped clear that up, and I hope you'll have fun on the Rift. See you next time.